Long before coins rang in the hands of merchants, before paper carried promises of value, humans lived in a world where trust, need, and memory guided exchange. In quiet villages and along slow-moving rivers, people traded grain for tools, shells for stories, and labor for survival. No clocks hurried them. No numbers ruled their days. Value was felt, not counted. Tonight, we drift back to that softer time, when money was not yet metal or ink, but an idea forming slowly in the human mind. Calm journey through the birth of money, shaped by patience, necessity, and centuries of quiet change. As this story unfolds, allow your thoughts to slow and your breathing to soften. If these peaceful journeys into ancient history help you rest, consider subscribing to the channel. It gently supports the creation of more calm stories like this, made to relax the mind and ease you into sleep. Now, let us begin, long before the idea of money took shape. Human life moved to rhythms far older and gentler than markets or numbers. Survival was not something achieved alone. It was woven into the fabric of community, shared labor, and quiet cooperation. Each day began not with thoughts of profit or ownership, but with the simple awareness of the land, the weather, and the people nearby. Food, shelter, and safety were collective concerns, understood instinctively rather than negotiated. In these ancient communities, the world felt smaller but fuller. People knew one another deeply, not through names written on records, but through years of shared seasons, shared struggles, and shared successes. A person's value was not measured by what they possessed, but by how they contributed. Strength, skill, memory, and care all held meaning. A skilled hunter was respected not because he owned the hunt, but because he fed others. A gatherer's knowledge of roots and berries was a gift to the group, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Food was rarely considered private property. When an animal was brought down, its meat was divided among families. The act of sharing was not charity. It was survival wisdom. No one could predict the next successful hunt, the next storm, or the next illness. To hoard was to invite isolation, and isolation often meant death. In this way, generosity was practical, not moralized. It kept the group strong and ensured that, when fortune turned, help would return in another form. Daily work unfolded slowly and communally. Some prepared tools, shaping stone or bone with patient hands. Others tended fires, repaired shelters, or watched over children and elders. Tasks overlapped naturally, without strict boundaries or schedules. Time was measured by sunlight, hunger, fatigue, and the turning of seasons. There was no rush to accumulate, because accumulation served little purpose. What could not be eaten, worn, or used soon would spoil or break. Shelter reflected the same shared logic. Dwellings were built together, maintained together, and abandoned together when the land required movement. Ownership of space was temporary and fluid. A shelter was not a mine in a permanent sense. It was ours for as long as it stood. Even tools passed easily between hands. A blade, a basket, or a fishing net belonged to the moment and the need, not to a single person's claim. Children grew up watching this quiet interdependence. They learned not through formal instruction, but through presence, observing adults work, listening to stories told beside the fire, absorbing values without words. They learned that survival was something done together. They learned that taking more than needed disrupted balance, and that giving strengthened bonds. These lessons were not enforced by law or punishment, but by social memory and shared experience. Elders held a special place in these communities. Though they might no longer hunt or travel far, they carried knowledge of migrations, seasons, healing plants, and past mistakes. Caring for them was not seen as a burden. Their presence connected the living to those who had come before. In a world without written records, memory itself was a form of wealth, carefully protected through respect and attention. Conflict existed, as it always does among humans, but resolution leaned toward preservation rather than punishment. Disputes threatened unity, and unity meant survival. Decisions were often made through discussion, storytelling, and consensus. The absence of rigid ownership reduced many sources of tension when little was owned outright. There was less to defend, less to steal, and less to envy. Nature was not viewed as a resource to be owned, but as a living system to be understood. Rivers, forests, and animals were approached with a mixture of gratitude and caution. Taking too much was believed to bring imbalance, whether through spiritual consequence or simple scarcity. Seasonal movement allowed the land to recover, reinforcing the idea that humans were participants in the environment, not masters of it. Illness or injury revealed the true strength of these early societies. When someone could not work, others compensated without expectation of repayment. Care was given freely because everyone understood that vulnerability was temporary and universal. Today's helper could be tomorrow's dependent. This quiet understanding reduced fear and fostered resilience. Even trade between groups followed similar principles. Exchanges were often ceremonial, accompanied by feasting, storytelling, and gift-giving. These interactions strengthened alliances rather than focusing on exact equivalence. The goal was relationship, not profit. Value was flexible, shaped by context, need, and trust rather than fixed measurement. As night fell, communities gathered around firelight. Stories were shared, not just for entertainment, but to reinforce collective memory and identity. These stories carried lessons about cooperation, restraint, and belonging. They reminded listeners that survival was a shared story, still being written each day. In such a world, life was not easy, but it was deeply connected. The absence of money did not mean the absence of order. Instead, order arose from relationships, routines, and mutual reliance. People knew where they belonged because they were needed. Their worth was evident in daily actions, not accumulated objects. This way of living persisted for thousands of years, shaping human instincts long before currency appeared. Even today, echoes of it remain in the comfort of shared meals, the relief of help offered without condition, and the quiet satisfaction of contributing to something larger than oneself. Life before money was not defined by lack, but by balance. It was a world where survival depended less on ownership and more on connection, and where the simplest truth guided every day. No one endured alone. In the long span of human history, barter emerged not as an invention, but as an instinct. When people began to produce more than they immediately needed, exchange followed naturally. Nate met a tool maker with extra blades. A gatherer with dried fruits encountered someone skilled in weaving baskets. These early exchanges required no abstract system of value. They were grounded in immediate usefulness, mutual need, and face-to-face understanding. Barter felt natural because it mirrored the directness of daily life itself. In small communities, everyone roughly knew what everyone else did. Skills were visible, and effort was easily recognized. When someone offered a good, its value was understood through familiarity. A well-shaped spear point showed the hours of careful work behind it. A bundle of cured hides represented successful hunts and patient preparation. There was little need to debate worth because context provided clarity. Exchange was often informal, woven into social interaction rather than treated as a separate activity. Barter also aligned closely with the rhythms of nature. Seasons dictated abundance and scarcity. During harvest times, food flowed more freely. During lean months, exchanges became more cautious but also more cooperative. Goods were traded not only for immediate use, but sometimes in anticipation of future needs. This required trust, memory, and social bonds, qualities already essential for survival. At first, barter reinforced cooperation. It encouraged specialization, allowing individuals to focus on skills they performed best. As specialization grew, so did the variety of goods available. This diversity made life more stable and communities more resilient. A person did not need to master every task. They needed to maintain good relationships. Barter thus strengthened social ties, embedding economic activity within human connection. Yet even in its earliest form, barter depended on coincidence. Both parties had to want what the other offered at the same time. This a double coincidence of once worked in small groups with limited needs, but it became increasingly fragile as societies expanded. A potter might need food, but the farmer might already have enough pots. The exchange stalled, not because goods lacked value, but because desires failed to align. As communities grew larger and interacted with outsiders, these limitations became more visible. Strangers did not share the same trust or social memory. Evaluating the quality of goods became harder without familiarity. Negotiations took longer, misunderstandings increased. What once felt simple began to feel uncertain, even tense. Barter relied heavily on personal knowledge, which weakened as networks widened. Perishability posed another challenge. Many valuable goods spoiled quickly. Meat rotted, fruits fermented, and grains attracted pests. Exchanging such items required precise timing. If needs did not match at the right moment, value was lost. This urgency added pressure to barter, making it less flexible in complex societies. Transport added further strain. Carrying bulky or heavy goods over long distances limited what could be traded. A person might possess something valuable, but impractical to move. This constrained trade routes and discouraged long-distance exchange, slowing cultural and technological spread. Measurement also emerged as a problem. Without standardized units, exchanges relied on estimation. How many fish equaled one hide? How much grain was fair for a tool? These questions had no fixed answers. Negotiations depended on mood, circumstance, and power dynamics. Disputes could arise not from malice, but from differing perceptions of fairness. Over time, certain goods began to appear repeatedly in exchanges. Items that were durable, portable, and widely desired gained preference. Salt preserved food. Shells carried beauty and symbolism. Livestock represented stored labor and future value. These goods did not replace barter immediately, but they eased its friction. They acted as bridges, making exchange smoother without fully abandoning the direct trade of goods. Even then, barter remained deeply human. It allowed storytelling, relationship building, and mutual recognition. An exchange was not just economic, it was social. Agreements were sealed with gestures, shared meals, or rituals. Breaking them risked more than loss of goods. It risked reputation and trust. However, as societies layered complexity upon complexity, settlements becoming towns, towns becoming cities, the weight placed on barter grew heavy. Administrative needs emerged. Leaders needed to collect resources for communal projects, defense, or storage. Barter struggled to scale. Keeping track of obligations, contributions, and distributions became increasingly difficult without abstraction. The limits of barter did not signal failure. Instead, they revealed growth. Human societies had reached a point where direct exchange alone could no longer support their interconnected lives. The need for a more flexible system became apparent, not to replace human connection, but to support it across greater distances and larger populations. Still, barter never vanished entirely. Even after the rise of money, people returned to barter during crises, in isolated regions or within close communities. Its persistence speaks to its intuitive nature. Barter reflects a fundamental human impulse to meet needs through cooperation, negotiation, and mutual recognition. The barter world was a bridge between pure sharing and abstract value. It carried humanity forward while exposing the challenges of complexity. In its simplicity lay both strength and limitation. It worked beautifully when life was small and familiar. As life expanded, it gently showed humans that value needed a new form, one that could travel farther than memory, last longer than food, and speak clearly even between strangers. Long before symbols were stamped onto metal or value was written on paper, trust moved quietly through human communities, shaping exchange and cooperation. It was invisible, yet deeply felt. In early societies, where survival depended on one another, trust became the first true currency. It could not be stored in a pouch or measured in units, but it held power over food, safety, and belonging. Reputation, promises, and memory worked together to create systems of value that were both fragile and enduring. In small groups, people were constantly observed, not in a watchful or suspicious way, but in the natural closeness of shared life. Everyone knew who kept their word, who worked diligently, who shared fairly, and who took more than needed. These patterns formed reputations, and reputations traveled faster than any object. A person known for reliability could expect help in times of need. Someone known for selfishness might find doors quietly closed. In this way, reputation functioned as a ledger, written in collective memory. Promises carried weight because breaking them carried consequence. When someone promised to return a tool, share the next hunt, or help with future labor, that promise was not abstract. It was tied directly to survival and social standing. To fail without reason was to weaken trust, and weakened trust meant vulnerability. People remembered, not out of resentment but out of necessity. Memory ensured that cooperation remained stable and that risks were shared wisely. Memory itself was a form of wealth. In societies without writing, remembering past actions was essential. Elders often carried these memories, recalling who helped whom, which families honored agreements, and how conflicts were resolved. This collective remembrance allowed communities to function without formal contracts. Agreements lived in stories, repeated around fires and during work, reinforcing norms without enforcement. Trust allowed exchange to extend beyond immediate reciprocity. Someone could give today knowing that return might come later, in a different form. A fisher might share a catch with a neighbor, trusting that when illness came or tools broke, help would be offered. This delayed exchange required faith in people rather than objects. It deepened relationships and smoothed the uncertainties of daily life. As groups interacted with neighboring communities, trust expanded carefully outward. Initial exchanges were cautious, often ceremonial. Gifts were offered not to equalize value, but to signal intention. These early gestures said without words, "We wish to trade, not to harm." Over time, repeated fair exchanges built trust between groups, allowing wider networks to form. Reputation crossed boundaries through travelers and storytellers, becoming a bridge between strangers. Promises also bound future action. Seasonal cooperation depended on them. People promised to meet again for harvest, to share stored food during winter, or to defend territory together. These commitments required long-term trust. There were no courts to appeal to, only memory and consequence. Trust shaped leadership as well. Those who guided communities were often those known for fairness, wisdom, and consistency. Authority did not come from ownership, but from credibility. Leaders who broke trust quickly influence. This kept power balanced and responsive, rooted in ongoing approval rather than permanent control. Even spiritual beliefs reinforced trust-based systems. Many communities believed that unseen forces watched human behavior. Honesty, generosity, and promise keeping were not only social expectations but cosmic ones. This belief strengthened accountability when human memory alone might falter. Trust was protected not just by people, but by meaning. However, trust was not limitless. It thrived in closeness and familiarity but strained under distance and growth. As populations increased, it became harder to know everyone personally. Memory blurred. Reputation became less precise. Promises made to strangers carried greater risk. These challenges did not erase trust's importance, but they revealed its boundaries. Still, even as societies grew, trust remained foundational. Early forms of standardized exchange did not replace trust. They rested upon it. The first accepted objects of value worked only because people trusted others to accept them too. Behind every early transaction stood an assumption of shared belief and reliability. In moments of crisis, trust revealed its true power. When food was scarce or danger approached, communities leaned heavily on those bonds. People shared not because they calculated return, but because trust assured survival beyond the present moment. It softened fear and organized response without command. Trust as the first currency was slow to earn and easy to lose. It required patience, consistency, and empathy. Yet it allowed humans to coordinate, specialize, and grow long before formal systems existed. It transformed individual effort into collective resilience. Even today, beneath modern economies, trust still flows quietly. We rely on promises, reputations, and memory more than we often realize. Contracts, money, and institutions work because trust supports them. In remembering this ancient truth, we see that value was never only about objects. It was and remains about relationships, carefully built, gently maintained, and deeply human. As human societies grew more complex and barter revealed its limits, certain objects began to take on a special role in exchange. These items did not become money by decree or design. They earned their place slowly through repeated use, shared agreement, and cultural meaning. Shells, salt, beads, livestock, and grain emerged across different regions and times, chosen not for randomness, but for qualities that made them practical, memorable, and symbolically powerful. Each carried value not only in what it could be traded for, but in what it represented within human life. Shells were among the earliest objects to move beyond simple ornamentation and into exchange. Found along coastlines and carried far inland, they were naturally scarce in many regions. Their durability allowed them to last across seasons, and their beauty made them desirable. Shells could be strung, counted, and transported with relative ease. In some cultures, specific types of shells gained agreed-upon worth, not because they were useful for survival, but because they were recognized and respected. Their value rested on shared belief. To accept a shell in exchange was to trust that others would do the same. Salt followed a different path to significance. Unlike shells, salt was essential to life. It preserved food, maintained health, and enhanced flavor. In warm climates where preservation was critical, salt became a lifeline. Its usefulness gave it immediate value, and its relative scarcity in certain regions increased demand. Salt could be divided, measured, and stored, making it practical for repeated exchange. Over time, its role expanded from necessity to symbol. To control salt was to control survival, and in many societies, access to salt reflected power and organization. Beads bridged the gap between function and expression. Often crafted from stone, bone, glass, or shell, beads required time and skill to produce. This labor invested them with value. They were durable, portable, and easily recognizable. Beads also carried cultural meaning. Colors, shapes, and patterns communicated identity, status, or spiritual belief. When used in exchange, beads carried stories along with value. Accepting them was not only an economic act, but a cultural one. Livestock represented a living form of wealth. Animals such as cattle, sheep, and goats provided food, labor, and materials over time. Unlike objects, they could grow and reproduce, increasing value. Livestock embodied stored effort and future promise. They were not easily transported, but within settled or semi-nomadic societies, they served as clear markers of wealth. To trade livestock was a significant act, often tied to social rituals such as marriage, alliance, or conflict resolution. Their value was deeply relational and symbolic. Grain became central in agricultural societies. Once humans learned to cultivate and store crops, grain represented both sustenance and stability. It could be measured, divided, and stored, making it suitable for organized distribution. Grain supported large populations and enabled the rise of settlements. As a medium of exchange, it tied value directly to survival. Those who controlled surplus grain held power, not through force, but through provision. Grain also connected people to time, representing past labor and future security. These objects shared key qualities that allowed them to function as early money. They were durable enough to last beyond immediate use. They were recognizable, with agreed-upon forms and meanings. They were scarce enough to be valued, yet accessible enough to circulate. Most importantly, they were embedded in cultural understanding. Their acceptance depended not on intrinsic worth alone, but on shared trust and tradition. The use of these items did not eliminate barter overnight. Instead, they eased its friction. A shell or bead could stand in for many goods, reducing the need for perfect alignment of wants. Salt or grain could be stored and exchanged later, extending value through time. These objects allowed exchange to stretch across distance and duration, supporting growing networks of trade, meaning played a crucial role in maintaining value. Objects that became money were often surrounded by ritual and story. Shells might be worn in ceremonies. Beads might mark life stages. Livestock might be honored in song. Grain might be blessed at harvest. These practices reinforced belief and value, anchoring economic function within emotional and spiritual life. Money, in its earliest forms, was never separate from culture. Regional differences shaped which objects gained prominence. Coastal societies favored shells. Arid regions prized salt. Pastoral communities centered on animals. Farming civilizations relied on grain. These choices reflected environment as much as invention. Early money was adaptive, responding to local needs and resources rather than imposing a universal standard. Over time, the limitations of these objects also became clear. Shells could be counterfeited or over-collected. Salt could dissolve or spoil if mishandled. Beads varied in quality. Livestock required care. Grain depended on harvest conditions. These weaknesses did not negate their usefulness, but they pushed societies toward further refinement of exchange systems. Still, these objects represent a crucial step in human history. They show how value shifted from immediate use to symbolic representation. They demonstrate how humans learned to agree collectively on worth, paving the way for later abstractions. Each object tells a story of adaptation, trust, and meaning. Even today, echoes of these early forms remain. We speak of wealth in terms of as stocks, a capital, and assets, concepts rooted in stored value. We decorate ourselves with symbols of worth. We trade in promises of future return. The path from shell to coin to digital number is long, but its foundation is ancient. Objects became money not because they were perfect, but because humans learned to see value together, quietly shaping systems that would one day span the world. As humans moved through the long process of assigning value to objects, some materials began to carry meanings that reached far beyond usefulness or rarity. These materials became sacred, not because they were officially declared so, but because they were woven into belief, ritual, and shared imagination. When value touched the spiritual or cultural heart of a community, it deepened and endured. Sacred value transformed ordinary materials into symbols of identity, continuity, and connection with forces unseen. In early societies, the boundary between the practical and the sacred was thin. Daily life and spiritual belief were not separate realms, but parts of the same experience. Objects used for survival often also carried symbolic weight. A stone that shaped tools might also be believed to hold ancestral memory. A shell worn as adornment might represent protection from harm. As these meanings accumulated, certain materials gained a presence that demanded respect. Gold is one of the most enduring examples of sacred value. Long before it functioned as currency, gold was admired for its unchanging nature. It did not rust, decay, or lose its shine. To early humans, this permanence suggested divine qualities. Gold seemed untouched by time, echoing ideas of eternity and immortality. When used in rituals, burials, or offerings, it became associated with gods, kings, and the afterlife. Its sacred aura increased its desirability, making it valuable even before it became widely exchangeable. Silver carried a different but equally powerful symbolism. Often linked with the moon, cycles, and reflection, silver was associated with intuition, balance, and mystery. In many cultures, it was believed to possess protective qualities. Wearing silver was thought to ward off illness or evil. These beliefs elevated its worth, turning it into more than a material. It became a guardian. When exchanged, silver carried both economic and spiritual assurance. Jade offers another window into sacred value. In several ancient cultures, jade was revered not for scarcity alone, but for its perceived harmony and life force. Its smooth texture and subtle glow suggested purity, and moral strength. Jade objects were placed in tombs worn by leaders and used in ceremonies meant to align humans with the natural order. Its value lay in what it symbolized: balance, virtue, and continuity across generations. Even organic materials gained sacred status. Feathers, bones, and specific woods were chosen for their association with animals or forces believed to carry spiritual power. A feather might represent freedom or communication with the sky. Bone might symbolize the essence of life itself. These materials, when used in exchange or gifting, carried layers of meaning that transcended function. To receive them was to receive blessing, status, or connection. Color also contributed to sacred value. Certain pigments required rare ingredients or complex processes to produce. Purple dyes, for instance, demanded extensive labor and specific natural sources. The difficulty of creation combined with cultural symbolism turned such colors into markers of authority and divine favor. Objects bearing these colors became valuable not only for their material content, but for the sacred status they conveyed. Sacred value was reinforced through ritual. Objects used in ceremonies absorbed meaning through repetition. A bowl used in offerings, a bead passed through generations, or a blade used in initiation gained history. Each use layered memory upon material, transforming it into a vessel of collective experience. These objects could not be easily replaced or devalued, because their worth was inseparable from story. Burial practices further elevated sacred materials. Items placed with the dead were believed to accompany them beyond life, suggesting value that extended past the visible world. Gold, jade, beads, and other revered materials found in graves were not meant for circulation. Their inclusion affirmed belief in continuity and honored the dead's place in the community. This association with the eternal increased their perceived power among the living. Sacred value also shaped exchange between communities. When groups traded items of spiritual importance, they were not simply swapping goods. They were sharing symbols, beliefs, and trust. Such exchanges often required ceremony and respect. Mishandling sacred objects could offend not just people, but perceived higher forces. This care added gravity to trade, slowing it, deepening it, and strengthening alliances. Over time, sacred value influenced the development of formal money. When metals or materials already held spiritual significance, they were more easily accepted as representations of worth. Their use in exchange felt natural because trust had already been established through belief. Sacred value softened the abstraction of money, anchoring it in meaning before it became purely numerical. Yet sacred value was never static. Meanings shifted as cultures changed, merged, or faded. What was holy in one time or place might be ordinary in another. Still, the pattern remained. Humans consistently elevated materials that resonated with deeper questions about life, death, time, and belonging. These materials became anchors in a changing world. Even in modern life, sacred value persists. Objects associated with memory, ritual, or identity carry worth beyond price. We treasure heirlooms, symbols, and artifacts not for what they can buy, but for what they represent. This impulse connects us directly to ancient minds who saw value not only in survival, but in meaning. Sacred value reminds us that money did not begin as a cold system of exchange. It emerged from belief, reverence, and shared story. Materials gained worth because they spoke to something human and enduring. In recognizing this, we see that the roots of currency lie not only in economy, but in the quiet human search for significance. As human societies expanded and trade networks stretched across wider landscapes, the need for a more reliable and flexible medium of exchange became increasingly clear. Barter and early object-based value systems had carried communities far, but their limits were now gently pressing against growing complexity. In response, metals emerged not through sudden revolution, but through gradual acceptance. Copper, silver, and gold offered calm, practical solutions to the quiet problems trade had begun to face. Copper was often the first metal to enter human exchange. It was relatively easy to find and shape, requiring less intense heat than later metals. Early people discovered that copper could be hammered into tools, ornaments, and simple forms without losing integrity. Its durability set it apart from organic materials that decayed or spoiled. As copper objects circulated, they began to represent stored labor and effort. A copper piece carried with it the memory of mining, shaping, and skill, making it an understandable measure of value. Copper's usefulness in tools also strengthened trust in its exchange value. Even if a copper object was not immediately needed for trade, it could always be repurposed. This dual nature, both functional and symbolic, made copper a gentle bridge between practical barter and abstract value. It reduced the urgency of timing that plagued perishable goods and allowed value to move more freely through time. But as trade networks grew longer and more layered, silver began to gain prominence. Silver was less common than copper and carried a quiet beauty that distinguished it. Its brightness and resistance to corrosion made it appealing and enduring. Silver's relative scarcity gave it a higher value-to-weight ratio, solving problems of transport and storage. Larger values could be carried in smaller amounts, easing long-distance trade. Silver also carried cultural meaning. Often associated with the moon and cycles, it resonated with spiritual belief. This symbolism reinforced trust. When people accepted silver, they accepted not just a metal, but a shared understanding of its worth. Silver objects were easier to standardize in size and weight, allowing more consistent exchange. This consistency reduced disputes and simplified negotiation, smoothing the flow of commerce. Gold followed a similar path, though its role was distinct. Gold was rare, soft, and remarkably stable. It did not tarnish or corrode, remaining unchanged across generations. To early societies, this permanence suggested timeless value. Gold became associated with authority, ceremony, and the divine. Its beauty alone inspired confidence, but its physical properties made it ideal for long-term storage of wealth. Gold's high value relative to size solved many trade challenges. It allowed large exchanges to occur without cumbersome transport. Its divisibility enabled precise measurement, while its uniformity made standardization possible. Gold quietly addressed multiple trade problems at once: durability, portability, recognizability, and trust, without demanding radical change in human behavior. The gradual shift toward metal exchange did not erase older systems. Barter, gifting, and sacred objects continued alongside metals for generations. Metals simply offered an additional layer, one that adapted well to expanding societies. They allowed strangers to trade with less reliance on personal knowledge. A piece of silver or gold carried value that could be recognized beyond local memory. This transition was calm rather than disruptive. People did not abandon trust. They transferred it. Trust moved from individual reputation to shared agreement about metal value. This collective trust required social reinforcement through ritual, authority, and repeated use. Over time, metals became familiar, and familiarity bred confidence. Metals also enabled early administration. Leaders could collect and redistribute metal wealth more efficiently than perishable goods. This supported public works, defense, and storage. Metal exchange helped organize growing populations without constant negotiation. It offered a stable reference point in an increasingly interconnected world. Yet metals were not perfect solutions. Mining required labor and organization. Control of metal sources introduced new power dynamics. These challenges, however, emerged gradually and were balanced by the benefits metals provided. They allowed trade to continue expanding without overwhelming existing social structures. The birth of metal exchange marked a turning point, not because it replaced humanity's cooperative instincts, but it supported them at scale. Copper, silver, and gold did not create value. They carried it. They allowed human agreement to travel farther, last longer, and remain recognizable across distance and time. Even today, these metals hold symbolic weight. They represent stability, trust, and endurance, qualities first recognized thousands of years ago. Their early adoption reminds us that progress does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, shaped by patience and need, offering calm solutions to problems humans barely realized they were solving. The emergence of the first coins represented a subtle but profound shift in human economic and social life. Unlike the earlier exchange of metals, shells, or livestock, coins introduced a system of value that was standardized, portable, and recognizable across communities. Their significance lay not only in the materials they contained, but in the symbols stamped upon them, symbols that quietly carried authority, trust, and shared meaning. The birth of coinage solved practical problems of trade while reinforcing social cohesion, and it did so without the need for lengthy negotiation or verbal assurance. Early coin-making civilizations arose in regions where trade was growing rapidly, and where existing systems of barter or metal exchange no longer sufficed. In Lydia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, the first coins appeared around the 7th century BCE. Crafted from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, these coins were carefully shaped and stamped with simple designs. The metal content provided intrinsic value, while the stamped images offered recognition and legitimacy. Kuch. A coin from Lydia could be accepted with confidence because the symbol guaranteed its authenticity and weight. The authority behind the stamp carried trust, allowing strangers to exchange value efficiently. Coinage quickly spread to neighboring regions, including Greek city-states. Here, coins became more sophisticated, often featuring portraits of gods, goddesses, or symbols tied to the city-state's identity. The imagery served multiple purposes. It authenticated the coin, communicated civic pride, and subtly reinforced social hierarchy and belief systems. Citizens and traders could recognize the symbols even without reading inscriptions. Trust in the coin emerged from shared recognition of authority and consistency rather than verbal agreements. A stamped coin communicated certainty at a glance, making exchange simpler, faster, and more reliable. In China, coinage developed independently along similar principles. The earliest Chinese coins, dating back to the Zhou dynasty, were often shaped like spades or knives. These forms initially reflected objects that had functioned as barter goods, bridging familiarity with innovation. As standardization increased, round coins with central holes became common, allowing them to be strung together for convenience. Chinese coins bore inscriptions indicating authority and weight, providing a visual guarantee of value. Like their Mediterranean counterparts, these coins allowed trade across distance and between individuals who had never met, replacing personal trust with institutional recognition. Coins solved practical problems inherent in earlier exchange systems. They were durable, easily carried, and divisible. Unlike perishable goods or bulky livestock, coins could be transported without spoilage or strain. Their standard weight and composition reduced disputes over fairness, and the stamped symbols created consistency across time and place. Traders no longer had to rely on the memory of prior transactions or on intimate knowledge of others' reputations. The authority of the coin itself stood as a silent promise. The social dimension of coins was equally important. By embedding symbols of rulers, deities, or civic identity, coins communicated authority and cohesion. They reminded users of the structures that maintained order and fairness, reinforcing trust without words. Even when literacy was limited, the images were recognizable, allowing coins to function across diverse populations. A trader from one city could accept coins from another with confidence because the marks assured authenticity, creating a bridge of trust between strangers. Coin making required careful craftsmanship, which further enhanced trust. The process involved melting metal, shaping blanks, and striking them with engraved dies. The repetition of this process produced uniform coins, and deviation was immediately noticeable. If a coin was off-center or weighed differently, it was suspect. This consistency allowed communities to rely on coins as a predictable standard. Trust was embedded in both the metal and the workmanship. Coins also facilitated long-distance trade. As merchants traveled between cities, regions, and even empires, carrying standardized coins simplified transactions. Instead of negotiating every exchange or transporting large quantities of goods, traders could use coins as a common medium. The stamped images communicated acceptance and legitimacy, creating a network of economic trust that spanned distances far greater than local memory could reach. In addition to commerce, coins carried cultural significance. Truths. They often depicted rulers' faces, celebrating leadership and authority while subtly reinforcing obedience and recognition. Symbols of gods or civic emblems connected economic activity to spiritual or communal life. In this way, coins operated not only as tools of trade but as instruments of societal cohesion, silently reminding users of shared values and identities. The innovation of stamped symbols transformed the nature of trust itself. Where previously trust depended on personal knowledge, reputation, or repeated promises, coins shifted the guarantee into a visible, tangible form. A stamped image conveyed weight, authenticity, and authority, all at once. Trust became embedded in objects rather than relying solely on relationships, allowing societies to scale exchange in ways that had been impossible before. Even with the rise of coins, older forms of value did not disappear. Metals, livestock, grain, and sacred objects continued to circulate alongside coins for centuries. The two systems often coexisted, with coins gradually gaining dominance as commerce became more complex and far-reaching. The transition was gradual, reflecting careful adaptation rather than abrupt change. Coins also had limitations which influenced their evolution. Counterfeiting became a concern, requiring improved techniques and official oversight. Metal scarcity sometimes restricted minting, leading to adjustments in composition or value. Yet these challenges encouraged further innovation in design, regulation, and standardization. Now, the stamped symbols evolved to meet both economic and political needs, strengthening trust through visibility and consistency. By embedding authority in metal and image, early coin-making civilizations created a system that transcended personal familiarity. Coins allowed individuals to engage in exchange across social boundaries, geographic distances, and time, reducing friction and fostering economic growth. They were simple in design but profound in effect, combining practical utility with social and cultural resonance. Coins communicated certainty, continuity, and recognition without a single word being spoken. The legacy of early coins is still visible today. Modern currency continues to rely on symbols, consistent design, and trusted authority. National emblems, portraits, and seals echo the same principles that guided ancient civilizations. Coins remind us that value is not inherent in material alone. It is embedded in shared belief, authority, and recognition. Stamped symbols created trust, allowing communities to expand, trade to flourish, and societies to connect across space and time. In understanding the first coins, we see a remarkable convergence of practical problem-solving and cultural sophistication. Metals carried value, but symbols carried trust. Craftsmanship ensured reliability, while imagery reinforced social cohesion. Coins bridged human relationships and abstract systems, transforming the act of exchange into something both efficient and quietly meaningful. Through these small, stamped objects, early civilizations discovered that trust could be embedded in the tangible, allowing commerce, culture, and community to grow together in balance. In the earliest human settlements, markets were not merely places of trade. They were living spaces where the rhythms of life, labor, and community intertwined. Before the clang of coins or the formalization of currencies, these open spaces carried the pulse of daily survival. At dawn, markets awoke gently with the light, the slow stretching of bodies, and the first movements of people carrying goods to be exchanged. Smoke from cooking fires lingered in the air, mingling with the earthy scent of fresh soil, dew, and harvested produce. The sounds were subtle yet distinct. The rustle of baskets, the soft chatter of neighbors greeting one another, the distant call of a shepherd summoning livestock to the pen. each sound and smell layered together, creating a calm, deliberate atmosphere that guided the rhythm of exchange. Morning markets began with preparation. Farmers and gatherers arrived with baskets of grain, bundles of herbs, or carefully harvested fruits. Fishermen brought the day's catch, laid gently on woven mats or leaves, glistening with moisture. Artisans carried pottery, carved tools, or ornaments, their hands still warm from shaping the raw materials. The community moved slowly, not from laziness, but from necessity. The pace allowed careful inspection, negotiation, and mutual observation. Eyes met eyes across the stalls, recognizing both the value of goods and the reliability of the person offering them. This unhurried movement created a space in which both human relationships and commerce could flourish. As the sun rose higher, the market expanded, and the interplay of smells grew richer. Bread baking in earthen ovens filled the air with warmth and comfort, mingling with the aromatic tang of herbs and freshly turned soil. The scent of fish, salt, and cured meats layered above the subtle perfume of flowers or fruits brought from surrounding fields. Each aroma carried meaning, signals of abundance, care, and effort. Traders did not rush. They inhaled these cues, allowing them to gauge the quality and freshness of the goods. Sensory awareness was part of the transaction itself. Buying was not only a matter of need, but also an act of participation in the subtle language of the marketplace. Sounds amplified the rhythm of life in these early markets. Children laughed softly as they followed parents, sometimes helping to carry small baskets or chase after a stray animal. The cooing of pigeons or the lowing of cattle punctuated conversations. Occasionally, a bell or wooden rattle signaled the arrival of a new merchant or the beginning of a communal announcement. These auditory markers guided the market without demanding speed. Instead of creating urgency, they provided structure in a gentle order, like the movements of water around stones, persistent, flowing, and quietly insistent. Negotiation itself unfolded like a dance. Trades were often slower than later standardized markets would allow. A basket of grain might be exchanged for a tool or some preserved food, with pauses to inspect, compare, and discuss. Gesture and expression carried as much weight as words. A nod could confirm agreement. Trust was built in these exchanges as each participant observed not only the goods but the behavior of the other. The pace allowed understanding to grow, ensuring that both sides felt fairly treated and socially connected. By mid-morning, sunlight had begun to shift across the stalls, illuminating details in new ways. The gleam of metal tools reflected the light, catching the eye, while the translucence of fresh produce signaled ripeness and health. Textiles, dyed in subtle natural colors, draped across stands, revealing textures only visible when examined slowly. Traders often touched, smelled, or turned items carefully, a tactile engagement that made commerce a full-bodied experience. The marketplace was alive in its sights, sounds, and smells, a multi-sensory environment in which the value of goods was assessed with care and attention. As the day moved toward dusk, the atmosphere changed. Shadows lengthened, and the heat of the sun mellowed into a softer warmth. The bustle of early exchanges gave way to quieter, more reflective interactions. Some traders prepared to pack remaining goods, while others lingered to complete negotiations. Smoke from evening fires began to drift across the marketplace, carrying the scent of simmering stews and baked bread. In their slow unfolding, they demonstrated that commerce could be more than utility. It could be calm, immersive, and deeply human. In this way, ancient markets operated as both economic and cultural hubs. They allowed goods to circulate, value to be recognized, and relationships to grow. The invention of money, quiet and gradual, transformed human life in ways that extended far beyond mere trade. Before coins, metals, or standardized units of value existed, humans measured worth through immediate utility, personal trust, and the rhythms of survival. Goods were exchanged because they were needed, labor was shared because it was required, and future planning was limited by the constraints of perishability and proximity. When money emerged, it introduced the idea of abstract value, a representation of worth that could travel across time, space, and context. This abstraction reshaped the way people thought, acted, and imagined their place in the world. At its core, money separated value from immediate use. A piece of silver, a stamped coin, or even a bundle of standardized grain could represent labor, trust, or resources without being consumed immediately. This shift allowed people to consider transactions in a new dimension. Trade was no longer solely about meeting an immediate need. It became about planning, storing, and anticipating. A farmer could exchange surplus grain for coins in the knowledge that those coins could later purchase tools, textiles, or other necessities, even from distant communities. The ability to defer exchange introduced a form of temporal flexibility, expanding human thinking beyond the here and now. This abstraction also transformed the mental landscape of trade, where barter required a double coincidence of wants, each party needing exactly what the other offered. Money allowed a single-minded focus on value representation. People could carry a medium of exchange that others would recognize, regardless of immediate circumstance. This recognition of universally accepted worth simplified decision-making and reduced uncertainty. The cognitive load of constantly negotiating relative value or anticipating the desires of each trading partner diminished. In its place arose a subtler, more expansive way of thinking, one that allowed humans to conceptualize worth in flexible, symbolic terms. With abstract value came the freedom to explore new forms of trade and travel. Previously, transporting perishable goods or bulky commodities over long distances was fraught with risk. With coins or standardized metal, humans could carry concentrated value efficiently. Merchants traveled along rivers, across mountains, and between cities, carrying portable stores of wealth that could be exchanged in multiple locations. This mobility encouraged not only commerce but cultural interaction. Ideas, practices, and knowledge traveled alongside money, linking distant communities in ways impossible under purely material exchange systems. The human mind, in turn, adapted to this extended network, imagining broader horizons, calculating risk and benefit across geography, and developing early forms of logistical reasoning. Long-term planning became possible in a manner previously unattainable. Abstract value enabled humans to store wealth beyond immediate consumption, creating buffers against scarcity, uncertainty, and misfortune. A family could save surplus resources in the form of coins or durable metals, ensuring stability across seasons or years. Communities could accumulate reserves for defense, infrastructure, or ceremonial purposes. This ability to anticipate the future introduced a more complex, temporal understanding. Planning no longer ended with the next meal or the next harvest. It extended to seasons ahead, to the maintenance of relationships, and even to concerns about legacy and inheritance. Money allowed humans to translate effort in the present into security and opportunity in the future, subtly reshaping priorities and strategies. This shift also nurtured new forms of trust and social organization. Previously, value was tied to immediate reciprocity or personal reputation. With money, trust could be generalized and abstracted. A coin carried assurance because it was recognized and accepted within a broader social framework, not necessarily because the person handing it over was known intimately. This abstraction enabled larger, more impersonal systems of exchange, supporting trade networks, early markets, and eventually cities. Human thinking evolved to accommodate relationships mediated by symbols rather than by direct experience, expanding both social imagination and economic ambition. The cognitive implications extended into risk assessment and strategic thinking. When value could be abstracted and stored, humans could experiment with investments, speculative exchanges, or ventures into unfamiliar territories. The mental framework required to handle money incorporated probability, deferred gratification, and scenario planning. Traders and planners learned to balance immediate reward with long-term gain, developing a mindset attuned to complexity, delay, and interdependence. Even in small communities, this subtle shift altered behavior. Labor could be divided and specialized, resources allocated strategically, and social cooperation reinforced through anticipatory planning. Abstract value also encouraged standardization and measurement. With money, units of worth needed to be consistent. Weights, sizes, and purity levels became critical, and humans developed systems to assess and verify these qualities. This emphasis on precision nurtured quantitative reasoning, careful observation, and methodical thought. People learned to think about equivalence, proportion, and quality in systematic ways, enhancing cognitive capacities that extended beyond commerce into craft, agriculture, and administration. Money became a lens through which humans interpreted both tangible and abstract relationships. Beyond trade and planning, abstract value influenced social identity and perception. Wealth was no longer purely the accumulation of material goods. It could be stored, displayed, and recognized symbolically. Coins, metals, and other forms of money became markers of status, influence, and accomplishment. This recognition subtly shaped human behavior, encouraging foresight, ethical negotiation, and strategic cooperation. People began to consider not only what they owned, but how their resources would be perceived and utilized within a broader social context. The mind extended beyond personal need to communal awareness and reputation, mediated through abstract value. The emergence of money also reoriented human thinking about temporality and mortality. By storing abstract value, individuals could plan beyond the span of their immediate lives, transferring wealth, resources, or symbolic power to descendants or institutions. This capacity fostered ideas of legacy, lineage, and enduring social structures. Humans began to conceptualize the future in broader, more continuous terms, imagining consequences, continuity, and cumulative impact. Abstract value allowed effort, skill, and labor to ripple forward in time, quietly expanding the human sense of responsibility and foresight. Even leisure and creativity were affected. With some labor and trade mediated by abstract value, people could dedicate time to crafts, artistic expression, and intellectual endeavors. When immediate survival was not the sole focus, humans could explore, innovate, and build cultural complexity. Money, as a symbolic tool, freed cognition from constant immediate calculation, allowing reflection, experimentation, and cultural layering. The mind learned to handle both concrete and abstract dimensions simultaneously, balancing practical needs with imagination, relationships, and aesthetic sensibility. Abstract value also reshaped morality and decision-making. The notion that worth could be represented symbolically introduced questions about fairness, obligation, and responsibility that transcended immediate utility. Humans began to negotiate social and economic norms with reference to shared standards of value, rather than purely personal judgment. Ethical reasoning expanded to consider how resources should be exchanged, stored, and distributed over time. This reflected a subtle broadening of perspective, linking individual action with collective well-being in a way mediated through symbolic systems. The evolution of thought under money also fostered abstraction in other areas. Concepts of measurement, accounting, and record-keeping developed alongside currency. Humans began to quantify, categorize, and compare not only goods but ideas and obligations. Early ledgers, inscriptions, and later written records all reflect this cognitive expansion. Money cultivated a capacity to think in layers, to conceptualize equivalence, and to imagine relationships that were not immediately visible. The mind adapted to handle complexity, temporality, and social interconnection in ways previously unnecessary. In reflecting on the transformative impact of money, one sees that its power lies not in metal or coin alone, but in the human capacity to internalize abstraction. By representing value symbolically, money reshaped trade, travel, and long-term planning. It allowed humans to extend trust, planned beyond immediate survival, explored distant lands, and conceptualized the future in broader, more interconnected terms. Money quieted some of the uncertainties of life while introducing new dimensions of thought, imagination, and strategy. Its influence seeped into daily behavior, social organization, and cultural perception, altering cognition and consciousness gradually, almost imperceptibly. The gentle revolution of money teaches us that tools of abstraction can expand the human mind. By providing a medium for deferred value, standardized exchange, and symbolic trust, money encouraged thought in time, space, and relationship. It allowed humans to think in ways that bridged immediate needs and long-term vision, individual desire and collective good, the tangible and the conceptual. In shaping how humans valued, planned, and imagined, money quietly transformed thinking itself, leaving a legacy that continues to define both daily life and the broader sweep of civilization. The story of money is not one of sudden invention or dramatic breakthrough. It did not appear fully formed, minted and standardized, ready to solve the world's problems. Instead, it emerged slowly, quietly, and organically, shaped by human experience, necessity, and imagination over generations. Money settled into human life as a gentle companion, first woven into barter, then layered upon metals, symbols, and trust. Its influence grew incrementally, transforming trade, thought, and social structures without fanfare, leaving traces in the rhythm of daily life long before coins and paper became familiar. In the earliest communities, survival dictated the form and flow of value. People exchanged food, tools, and labor according to need, custom, and trust. There was no abstraction, no universal measure, just the immediate satisfaction of necessity and the steady cultivation of relationships. This practical, intimate system worked well for small groups. Members knew one another, understood each other's skills, and observed reputations closely. Exchange was guided by trust, memory, and reciprocity, forming a quiet network of cooperation that sustained life. The seeds of money were present here, in the sense that humans were already recognizing the worth of effort, skill, and materials, even if that recognition had not yet taken a symbolic form. As communities grew, the limitations of purely personal systems became apparent. Barter worked only when two parties had coinciding needs. If a hunter had meat but needed tools, he depended on finding someone who needed meat and had tools to offer. Or the inefficiency of this double coincidence of wants became more visible as trade expanded beyond the immediate settlement. Gradually, humans began to identify objects that could carry value more generally: shells, beads, salt, and livestock. These items were not money in the modern sense, but they introduced a fundamental principle. Value could be represented by something tangible yet separate from immediate consumption. This recognition was slow, intuitive, and deeply rooted in observation and experience. Trust was central in this gradual transformation. Early humans understood that value existed not only in objects themselves, but in the social networks that recognized them. A shell or a bead was useful because people agreed it was desirable. Livestock or grain carried worth because the community relied on their availability in exchange. Trust functioned as the first currency, flowing invisibly through transactions and reinforcing human interdependence. This social dimension meant that money was never just an economic tool. It was cultural, relational, and moral, slowly entwining itself with everyday life. The introduction of metals offered a gentle solution to practical problems. Copper, silver, and gold were durable, portable, and relatively scarce. They allowed value to be stored, transported, and measured more easily than perishable goods or bulky commodities. Initially, metals circulated alongside older forms of exchange. A farmer might trade grain for copper tools. A community could accept silver in return for services or food. The adoption of metals did not disrupt society abruptly. It layered a new system upon the existing one, allowing humans to extend the scope of trade. These metals carried intrinsic value and embodied labor, yet they also introduced the possibility of abstraction, gently nudging human thinking toward representation of worth beyond immediate utility. The first coins took this process further, but still quietly. Stamped with symbols, they guaranteed authenticity and standardized value without requiring personal knowledge or negotiation. The authority behind the coin, whether a ruler, city-state, or institution, communicated trust. Merchants, travelers, and citizens could rely on the stamped image, allowing trade to expand across regions. Coins were small, portable, and consistent, reducing friction in exchange. Yet their adoption was gradual. They circulated alongside metals, livestock, and grains for generations. People learned to recognize their worth, to incorporate them into familiar routines, and to extend trust from individuals to abstract symbols. Coinage did not suddenly transform society. It became an invisible scaffolding, supporting trade and planning over decades. Markets, both local and regional, reflected the gentle integration of money into daily life. At dawn and dusk, communities gathered to exchange goods, services, and ideas. Initially, barter, gift-giving, and barter-like transactions dominated. Over time, metals and coins began to supplement these exchanges, smoothing inefficiencies and enabling longer-distance trade. The rhythms of markets were slow and deliberate, allowing people to adapt naturally. Money did not impose itself. It merged into existing patterns of interaction, gradually becoming a familiar presence rather than a disruptive force. Each transaction, each accepted coin, reinforced confidence, understanding, and habit. The influence of money extended beyond trade into human cognition. With abstract value, people could plan for the future, anticipate scarcity, and store wealth for emergencies or distant ventures. They could evaluate risk, consider long-term outcomes, and calculate deferred reward. Travel became more feasible because portable standardized value reduced reliance on coinciding needs or personal trust. Social networks expanded, and economies became increasingly interdependent. All of these changes unfolded slowly in measured increments, allowing communities to adapt their mental frameworks, social norms, and cultural practices over generations rather than overnight. Money also shaped social identity and morality in subtle ways. As people learned to represent wealth abstractly, they reflected on fairness, trustworthiness, and obligation in new dimensions. They considered reputation, social recognition, and long-term relationships alongside immediate gain. Symbolic forms of value reinforced authority, hierarchy, and communal norms. Coins, metals, and other enduring objects became markers of status, cultural memory, and collective agreement. These shifts were gradual, embedded in everyday life, reinforcing social cohesion while extending human imagination and foresight. Even the sacred dimension of money emerged slowly. Certain metals, shells, or stones had already held spiritual or symbolic significance. As these objects became used in exchange, their sacred associations carried over, blending practical and cultural value. Gold and silver, revered for their beauty and permanence, gained importance in ritual and ceremonial life before serving as widely accepted currency. Money did not supplant meaning, it absorbed and reinforced it, moving quietly into human consciousness as a tool for trade, status, and symbolic expression simultaneously. Across generations, money became more than metal or coin. It became a lens through which humans viewed effort, risk, and opportunity. It allowed for abstraction, deferred exchange, and coordination across communities, yet it never arrived fully formed. It grew out of observation, necessity, trust, and imagination. Each innovation, from barter to shells, metals, coins, and symbolic exchange, was incremental, building upon prior experience. Societies adapted slowly, internalizing new forms of value without abrupt disruption. Money settled gently, like a quiet stream expanding into broader waters, altering landscapes and human perception over time. By the time money was widely recognized and used, it had already been centuries in the making. It had passed through the hands of countless generations, accumulating trust, familiarity, and meaning. Its arrival was not an event but a process, a continuous unfolding shaped by human creativity, observation, and cooperation. Each coin struck, each metal weighed, and each object accepted contributed to the slow, almost imperceptible weaving of money into life. It became a tool that mediated trade, memory, trust, and imagination, reshaping thought and society in ways both subtle and enduring. Even today, the influence of money retains traces of this gentle integration. Its use feels natural because it has been internalized. Over millennia, people accept abstract value without hesitation, plan for the future with currency in mind, and navigate social, economic, and cultural landscapes shaped by symbolic wealth. The transformation was not immediate, dramatic, or violent. It was quiet, steady, and cumulative. Money grew alongside human thought, habit, and society, settling into life over generations, leaving an imprint that is both profound and unobtrusive, a testament to the subtle power of gradual change.